Good evening. You're watching the main news on HKIBC. I'm Maisy Mok. Here's a look at tonight's top stories. Tens of thousands of Palestinians leave northern Gaza ahead of an expected Israeli land offensive. The European Union's top diplomat warns that protectionist sentiment could rise if its trade deficit with China keeps growing. And Hong Kong athletes are honored for their record-breaking performances at the Asian Games. Palestinian civilians in the besieged Gaza Strip have been told to head south on two reportedly safe routes as Israel prepares a massive offensive against Hamas. But officials in Gaza said many Palestinians, including women and children, were killed in Israeli air raids on convoys fleeing Gaza City. Israel has continued airstrikes on the Gaza Strip in its bid to wipe out Hamas, whose fighters attacked Israeli towns and settlements, killing 1,300 people. In retaliation, more than 1 million Palestinians in northern Gaza were ordered by Israel to leave ahead of an expected full-scale land assault. Tens of thousands of Palestinians, weakened by a lack of food and water, have been heading south, many of them on foot.
Moving more than 1 million people across a densely populated war zone to a place with no food, water or accommodation when the entire territory is under siege is extremely dangerous and in some cases simply not possible. Hospitals in the south of Gaza are already at capacity and will not be able to accept thousands of new patients from the north. Even wars have rules. International humanitarian law and human rights law must be respected and upheld.
U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has urged Israel to avoid harming civilians. As the Palestinian death toll climbed to nearly 2,000 since the conflict began last Saturday, former Norwegian diplomat Jarn Egerland accused Israel of a war crime. He said the evacuation order amounts to a transfer of population. British Conservative lawmaker Crispin Blunt warned that his own government could be complicit in war crimes if it doesn't do more to restrain Israel. As Israel beefed up its military presence along the Gaza border, its soldiers reportedly found the bodies of some Israelis captured by Hamas and taken to the enclave. With the clock ticking down, there are fears of more casualties. The Palestinian Prime Minister says Western support has encouraged Israel to crack down harder on his people.
This situation is catastrophic. It is ethnic cleansing. And for the Israeli army to issue an order to call for the push out of our people and removal and displacement of our people from north of Gaza to the south at the same time they have been bombarding the south of Gaza. This sort of resettling Palestinians has been there since 1950.
His comments came amid worldwide protests against the Israeli pounding of Gaza. One of the biggest demonstrations was in the Yemeni capital, Sana'a, where Israel and the United States were denounced. Thousands of Yemenis were killed by U.S.-made weapons in a long conflict when Saudi Arabia tried to influence political power over the impoverished state. In New York, the imam of a mosque called for calm as worshippers condemned double standards.
How come they spend billions of dollars to help the Ukrainian to fight the Russian because they are occupied there, and at the same time they are spending billions of dollars helping the Israeli to keep the occupation of the Palestinian? Is this not double standard? It's a crime when an Israeli got killed, but it's okay to kill 1,000 Palestinians? Are we subhuman? Are we animals? Don't we have rights?
The United States has promised to help secure the release of hostages held by Hamas. Relatives of the captives met the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations to appeal for assistance. They said some of the hostages need urgent medical care. U.S. envoy Linda Thomas-Greenfield assured them that Washington is working closely with Israel to try and rescue the hostages. Dozens of people were seized and taken to Gaza when Hamas fighters attacked Israel a week ago. One journalist has been killed and 6 others have been wounded by Israeli shelling along the border of Lebanon. Witnesses said a shell fell on a group of journalists who were reporting on the clashes. The Lebanese government accused Israel of committing aggression against a neighboring state. Reuters videographer Issam Abdallah was killed in the shelling. 2 other Reuters staff were wounded. Al Jazeera TV said 2 of its staff were injured. The other 2 casualties work for French news agency AFP. The European Union's top diplomat Josep Borrell has warned that public sentiment could turn more protectionist if its trade deficit with China isn't reduced. During a highly anticipated visit to China, Borrell met Foreign Minister Wang Yi to lay the groundwork for a summit later this year. Chloe Fong reports.
European Union Foreign Policy Chief Josep Borrell ended a 3-day visit to Beijing and Shanghai by conducting a joint press conference in the capital with Foreign Minister Wang Yi. They had earlier co-chaired the first high-level EU-China strategic dialogue in 2 years. Borrell said the 2 sides discussed economic security and the need to have a balanced approach to trade.
I stressed the commitment of the European Union to remain one of the most open economies in the world. Yes, we are one of the most open economies in the world. We don't want to be protectionist, but sometimes we have to protect.
The EU's trade deficit with China topped $17 billion last month, taking the tally for the first 9 months of the year to $170 billion. Borrell warned that if such an imbalance in economic and trade ties was not redressed, the EU policy of de-risking may accelerate far more than is good, as public opinion will increase pressure on governments to disengage from China. Wang, meanwhile, stated that China takes European concerns seriously. But he urged the EU to avoid protectionist behavior and be prudent in the use of trade remedies, noting that the bloc is conducting an anti-subsidy investigation into Chinese electric vehicles. He also said China will provide a more favorable environment for EU businesses. Borrell, for his part, stressed Europe's interest in finding common ground, saying the 2 sides need to work together more than ever to lessen conflicts. His trip to Beijing was also aimed at laying the groundwork for an EU-China summit, expected by the end of this year. Chloe Feng, HKIBC.
Locally, the Airport Authority and the MTR Corporation are studying ways to avoid a repeat of last Sunday's chaos when thousands of people were stranded when the number 9 typhoon signal was in force. Transport Minister Lam Sai-hong said one proposal is to allow trains on open-air lines to complete their journeys. Thousands of people were stranded in several MTR stations last Sunday as trains on the open-air sections of the railway stopped running when the number 9 typhoon signal was issued at 7 p.m. Speaking in an RTHK program, Transport Minister Lam Sai-hong said he has ordered the MTR Corporation to look into whether trains can continue to their final stop instead of suspending services as soon as the number 9 alert takes effect. Lam rejected suggestions of building a roof over open-air sections to protect cables from the rain because of the high costs. He disclosed that during the typhoon, the government discussed arranging coaches for stranded train passengers, but the idea was dropped after considering the driver's safety. There was also chaos outside the airport, as thousands of people, including arrivals, waited for hours to catch taxis after the airport express and buses stopped operating.
最安全嘅做法
Lam said the safest option is for people to stay inside the airport during a typhoon. The airport authority is studying how to improve conditions for stranded people. It may, for instance, give out tickets to those wanting a taxi so that they do not have to spend too much time waiting in line outside. The airport operator may also free up more indoor spaces for passengers to stay put. Lam ruled out stopping flights when a number 8 is issued, saying that could create greater inconvenience for passengers, including those who are in transit. A cat was found hanging from a tree in a pet garden in North Point this afternoon. Plastic bags were used to cover the carcass as officers questioned workers who sounded the alerts after coming across the grisly scene. The animal was already dead when police arrived. Officers classified the case as animal abuse and are searching for the person responsible. Overseas, Australians have rejected a proposal to recognize Indigenous people in their constitution. In a referendum, voters were also asked to give Aboriginal Australians and Torres Strait Islanders a voice in Parliament, but more than 50% of the voters dismissed the move. Australia's Indigenous citizens inhabited the country for more than 60,000 years, but are among the most disadvantaged. New Zealand's centre-right National Party will form a coalition government after winning the most votes in the general election. The party headed by Chris Luxon secured 40% of the votes. It will team up with the Association of Consumers and Taxpayers, better known as ACT, to form the next government. Incumbent Prime Minister Chris Hipkins conceded defeat after his Labour Party managed to get only 26% of the votes. On to the weather now. It will be bright and dry tomorrow. Temperatures will range between 25 and 29 degrees. There could be rain from Monday onwards. That's our main news for Saturday night. Join us for more news at 11. I'm Maisy Mok. Thanks for watching. Good night.